This is CBC Here and Now.
Our warehouse was getting full, and we just couldn't store any more of it.
Hundreds of thousands of gowns, face shields, and respirators taking up space in a warehouse.
Why all that PPE can't be used by healthcare workers in this province.
We've got some snow in the forecast for the province, and then as we head through midweek, it looks like the spring weather will move in.
I just got my renewals. My rates didn't go down. So I don't know, I guess they keep that money and put it in their profits.
It's quite surprising, and it's not a good trend.
Fewer people commuting to the office during the pandemic.
So why haven't insurance rates dropped? Good evening and welcome to Here and Now. I'm Carolyn Stokes.
And I'm Anthony Germain. Great to be back after a few months away. We're interrupting coverage of the federal budget, and that coverage does continue though on CBC News Network and on our website cbc.ca.
Of course, we have local reaction to tonight's budget. Peter Cowan is here to parse through what we know so far, and Finance Minister Siobhan Coady is expected to speak to reporters in about half an hour. So let's get to it.
Yes, Peter is standing by in our newsroom. So Peter, what is in this budget for Newfoundland and Labrador?
Anthony, we're just getting the first details out of this budget, but very few specific mentions for this province. There is some vague talk of continuing the Atlantic Loop to bring more hydropower from Labrador to customers in the Maritimes and beyond. That could be good to find new customers and new revenue to help offset the cost of Muskrat Falls. But there are a few big programs that will affect people across the country, including in this province. So let's take a look. So childcare is one of the big focuses in this budget. The goal is to cut fees by 50% in the short term. In total, they plan to spend $30 billion across the country for childcare. The goal by 2025 is to get childcare down to $10 a day. That's significant because in this province, Andrew Furey, when he became premier, lowered the cost for many people to $25 a day. So this would mark a significant decrease. Then there's things to fight the pandemic. So, for example, $30 billion to extend the current benefits. These are things like CERB, as well as the rent subsidies for businesses. Basically, they're continuing all those supports that they have in place until at least September, and it's going to cost $30 billion to do it. But what about after that? What's going to help the economy? Well, they've set aside $600 million to help create jobs. That's what they're going to do, is they're going to cover half the cost of new jobs that are created as an incentive there in order to encourage businesses to be able to invest and hire more people. So those are some of the big highlights. There we go. There's the $600 million to cover the cost of those new job creations once we get to the other side of the pandemic. This will be especially important for example, the tourism industry, which has been hard hit by this. But we'll have to find out in just a few minutes what the province thinks of all of this. The finance minister is going to be speaking live to reporters, so we'll get the provincial government reaction coming up later.
Thanks, Peter. That's Here Now's Peter Cowan reporting live. Well, Labrador MP Yvonne Jones is asking Nunavut MP Mimalak Kakak to apologize for discrediting her Indigenous identity. On Friday, the NDP MP tweeted, quote, "Jones is not an Inuk," in response to a 2019 article from the political blog Indigenous Politics. Now, Jones is a member of the Nunavut Community Council, a group of about 6,000 Inuit from southern and central Labrador. The group was formed as a society in the early 80s and primarily identified as Métis until 2010. Kakak is an Inuk woman born in the Northwest Territories. Today, at the House of Commons, Jones asked for Kakak to withdraw her comment.
I stand before this House today to point out to the member for Nunavut and that her domination attitude is the most prevailing one I've heard in some time. Her comments are laterally vicious and threatening to myself as an Inuk woman and to Inuit who are members of the Nunavut Community Council. As a descendant of Inuk and white parents, I was raised with a deep connection to the land, and I continue to practice the traditional ways of our people. Unfortunately, I've never seen such disrespect from another parliamentarian in my 25 years of political office. I ask the member to respect all Indigenous people in Canada and to apologize for her statement and stop committing racial erosion against her own culture. It is attitudes like hers that have set Inuit back decades in modern society. I expect an apology and a withdrawal of her statement on Twitter.
Well, in reaction to Jones' point of order, the speaker said he does not have jurisdiction over what goes on outside of the House and that he'd have to leave the matter at that.
Well, temperatures were pretty nice today across the board, about 9 degrees in St. John's. We saw temperatures towards Twillingate about 2 degrees, and then on the west coast about 6 this afternoon. And as we head up across Labrador, we saw a temperature near 9 degrees in Lab City, beautiful afternoon, and Lab City at 5. Now taking a look at the situation, we've got an area of low pressure just to the east. That's bringing some showers for eastern or western areas of the island as well as central. The radar is out at this point for eastern areas, but we did see some showers earlier today, and as we head through the night tonight, we're going to see the potential for some flurries for most of the northeast coast tonight as our temperatures hover near in and around the 0 degree mark. Those winds out of the west, but 20 to 40 kilometers per hour. We could see some accumulation tonight, 2 to 5 centimeters for some areas around Bonavista North. And then up across Labrador, we've got that potential for some showers, changing over to flurries through Happy Valley, Goose Bay, and the rest of Labrador. You're looking at the chance of some flurries. We'll get into the details on the long-range forecast because a warm-up is on the way when I come back.
Thanks, Ashley. The provincial government's first order of business today was a promise to review and renew Newfoundland and Labrador's Elections Act. The new Justice Minister says it's a move to modernize an act that was written 30 years ago. He said it's not an acknowledgement that there were problems with the 2021 general election.
Doesn't necessarily mean that were problems. There may have been, there may not have been, but again, there are 4 court actions now that are ongoing by 3 candidates in this election, and those questions and answers will be done by a judge, which is appropriate.
I don't know if the Justice Minister had a chance to do a full review of everything that had happened, so I really can't say what he thinks may or may not have gone right or wrong. Certainly what I have seen in looking at the Act, there have been contraventions of the Act.
Have an update on the province's vaccine rollout. The health minister says teachers and dentists can expect to receive their first COVID-19 vaccinations in the next 3 to 4 weeks.
Teachers fall under phase 2. We have a list, and that list is guided by NACI and by public health experts, and we're working our way down it. We are into phase 2 already, and I was advised this morning that we could be through phase 2 in terms of giving first shots for everyone within as little as 3 or 4 weeks.
Well, Premier Andrew Furey says the province is still working on exactly which Newfoundland and Labrador healthcare workers will respond to the COVID-19 disaster in Ontario. A field hospital has been set up on the grounds of Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto and is expected to start taking patients in the coming week as regular hospitals become overwhelmed. Furey said sending people to Ontario will not impact services here, but he argued it's something Newfoundland and Labrador must do because Ontario is facing an acute crisis like the country has never seen before.
It is frightening, and it's frightening, frankly, because of the ripple effect. When you consider that Ontario is the center of the country, and we all have friends and family in Ontario, and we all know that COVID-19 does not respect any geographical borders. So this is important, not just to the people of Ontario, but to the people of Canada. This is a time where we can all step up and contribute to the Federation, and is really why we joined Canada in the first place. And I think this is a way that we can play a part.
Well, including the numbers from the weekend, there was a total of 7 new cases of COVID-19 in the province. 3 cases announced today, a man in Eastern Health and a man and a woman in Western Health. They are all either travel-related or a contact of another case. 4 new cases were announced over the weekend for a total of 25 active cases in the province. 14 are in the eastern region, 11 in the western region. There's another flight advisory to tell you about as well. Anyone who traveled from Toronto to Deer Lake last Monday on Air Canada flight 8008 is asked to get tested. Tonight, CBC Investigates tells you about the province's pandemic warehouse. There are gowns, face shields, and respirators just sitting there that can't actually be used for medical purposes in Newfoundland and Labrador. Hundreds of thousands of them that have been there taking up space for months. Here now's Rob Antle explains where it all came from and why it ended up here.
Personal protective equipment, or PPE, helps keep medical professionals safe from things like COVID-19. The Public Health Agency of Canada sends PPE to the provinces to help them out. But late last year, Newfoundland and Labrador tried to send some of it back.
Our warehouses were getting full, and we just couldn't store any more of it.
There's nothing wrong with what was sent here. It's not defective, and it does meet federal specifications for healthcare. But the person in charge of the medical procurement system here says the province has stricter standards for some PPE.
Our infection control people are the experts. They tell us what they consider to be needed to protect our employees.
So there are hundreds of thousands of items that can't be used in the medical system here. Respirators, gowns, and face shields just sitting in the provincial warehouse. The feds not taking it back.
Normally our system would have around 60 days of burn rate with the inventory we carry. There have been occasions when that's been down to 10 days.
When the pandemic began, the PPE situation here was grim, but that's changed. John Cappenbush says they're on track to have a 180-day stockpile by the summer.
We're in very good shape. We're in very good shape, especially in relation to our suppliers, the stability of the supply chain, which has gotten better.
As for those items in the warehouse that don't meet the medical standards here, some have been repurposed, like hand sanitizer sent to the school system. The province continues to accept other PPE and supplies from the feds that do meet the standards, as officials try to figure out what to do with the items already sent here that don't. Rob Antle, CBC News, St. John's.
Well, if you're a driver, there's a good chance you spent a lot less time behind the wheel during the pandemic. Statistics show that fewer drivers resulted in far fewer collisions in this province last year. So what does it mean for insurance costs if companies are paying out less in claims? As Here and Now's Terry Roberts reports, it's still too early to say whether rates will drop this year, but don't get your hopes up.
There's a new name on the scene when it comes to monitoring insurance trends in this country. It's an online price comparison website called HelloSafe.ca. HelloSafe.ca says insurance prices dropped slightly across Canada last year, reversing a years-long trend in the other direction. But here in Atlantic Canada, prices continued to climb, though at a slower rate than previous years.
We've seen that in 2020, some prices still have increased, including in Newfoundland. So it's quite surprising, and it's not a good trend.
The outlook for this year, however, is much better.
So we can expect for 2021 a decrease in prices for drivers in Newfoundland and all across Canada.
While it doesn't have any official data, the team at HelloSafe estimates that insurers in Atlantic Canada paid out $350 million less in claims last year, although that doesn't mean insurers are swimming in profits.
The average cost of claims have gone up, so that cuts a little bit of those profits.
This St. John's-based personal injury lawyer believes insurance companies did very well last year, saving big not only on claim payouts, but on Section B medical benefits as well for treatments like physiotherapy.
You're certainly upwards of $500 million in total, B as in Bob, billion, savings during the pandemic, and I just got my renewals. My rates didn't go down, so I don't know, I guess they keep that money and put it in their profits.
That said, Marshall says drivers still don't have it that bad in this province.
For $1 million protection for you and your family, compare that. And, you know, I'm not saying it's a good deal, it's still a lot of money, but relatively speaking, car insurance in Newfoundland and Labrador is still a good deal.
According to data provided by the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary, collisions in its coverage area plummeted by nearly 40% last year. So what might that mean for insurance claims?
We're still putting the pieces of that picture together.
The insurance industry says it still does not have a clear picture of the situation from 2020. The data on claim payouts and other metrics is not expected to be available until probably June. But while the number of claims are likely to be lower, Insurers say the severity of those claims, in many cases, have gone up.
Some individuals were taking the opportunity of vacant roads to drive at excessive speeds. So a lot of stunting tickets were issued.
The insurance industry is also quick to tout relief measures implemented last year.
Here in Atlantic Canada, from the start of the pandemic to December 30th, insurers gave back $80 million and deferred another $8 million in premium. So not insignificant numbers.
So if your driving habits have changed dramatically because of the pandemic and you're looking for a little financial relief, well, Amanda Dean has some advice. Call your insurance provider.
The challenge, especially for us being in Atlantic Canada, where there are more cars on the road than perhaps, say, downtown Toronto, insurers don't know if you're an individual who is still at home or if your driving patterns have returned.
As for those rate increases last year, it's important to remember that auto insurance in Newfoundland and Labrador, unlike home insurance, is regulated by the Public Utilities Board. So those rate increases you felt last year were likely approved in the pre-pandemic era. The thing to look out for now is what will insurance companies be looking for in terms of a rate structure when they go before the utility regulator this year. Amanda Dean says that remains to be seen. But don't get your hopes up that rates will drop. Driving habits are slowly returning to pre-pandemic levels, and the longer-term trend in this province has been one of steadily increasing claims payouts by insurance companies.
If a rate increase is required in Newfoundland and Labrador because of claims history within that province and that insurer's experience, they will be filing for it.
Steve Marshall will be watching closely.
And I'm sure the next go round there's going to be a few more questions asked about how much didn't they pay out, or how much less did they pay out during the pandemic.
Insurance is a for-profit industry. The best we can do as drivers to influence things is to improve our driving habits, which would lead to safer roads, fewer scenes like this one, and possibly lower insurance premiums. Terry Roberts, CBC News, St. John's.
Well, the tourism arm of the City of St. John's has pulled its recent promotional video and is also apologizing for it. Destination St. John's says it's sorry the video did not include anyone of color, anybody Indigenous or LGBT, or anyone with disabilities or from other underrepresented communities. In an unsigned news release, the organization says it will take the necessary steps to fix it. In addition to pulling the video, Destination St. John's says it will redo it properly, with diverse representation in front of and behind the camera. It also says it will work hard to make sure it doesn't happen again, and it will review its policies to ensure greater inclusiveness.
Welcome back, everyone, and welcome back, Anthony. It has been almost 4 months since you've been here on the show. You've been away teaching in Natwashish. So how does it feel to be back?
And you are? It's always great to get back home, of course, and I'm glad to be back with you and here and now with Ashley, but it was an enriching experience. A bit cold at times. I hadn't lived in Labrador in the winter, but certainly very warm and friendly with the students and the teachers at the Mushwa Innu School. So I'd like to thank them. I know a lot of them are watching tonight for having me as a guest. And I know Ashley and Karen, we have tens of thousands of viewers in here now, but if you want a really tough audience, not usually nervous on TV, but try a classroom of grade 8 students because they are a tough bunch, challenging, and it was very rewarding. And I miss the kids already. And I also brought back some pictures here for you to take a look at.
Let's see.
So Georgie, great.
Handing out some tips.
I have no idea how he got the hat, but just these wonderful children who come up to you and talk to you. And of course, you see lots of kids on their skidoos, and some of them even took me for a little ride.
Oh, great hat.
Various apparel, as you can see. Another CBC guy. So it's interesting, young teenagers and others, and
oh my goodness!
Yes, I put that there for you.
Oh wow!
Almost
so cute.
Almost ended up coming home. The dog, not the little girl that you see right there, but wonderful children. That's Keith Hewitt. He was a teacher who was supervising me rather closely there, as you see in that picture. And yes,
yikes!
3.5 months without access to things we take for granted here. So yeah, it was quite the experience.
Is that you in a barber chair? Because you don't look like that right now. I assume that's when you were getting all of it.
Yes, many hours later. Yeah, the comparisons to David Suzuki and Einstein were bad, but when people online said I looked like Colonel Sanders, I said, okay, that's it, gone. But it's great to be back.
Oh, it's great to have you back. I'm sure that all of the students in Natwashish are going to miss you very much, but we're happy to have you back.
Definitely are.
Yes, and Ashley, you spent a lot of time in the north as well, so I'm sure you and Anthony will probably have things to talk about with your experience and his experience.
And the laid-back nature of everything. Yeah. I'm sure he knows that now.
Yeah. So the weather, you said earlier that we're in for a bit of a warm-up.
Yeah, I hinted at it last week. It's taking a little bit longer to get here than it looked like it would last week, but certainly a warm-up is on the way. However, we do have some flurries to get through first. Let's take a look at the temperatures this afternoon. Reached a high near 9 degrees in St. John's, and similar temperatures across the board, anywhere from 5 to 9 for the island. A little bit cooler for along the northeast coast. And then we've got temperatures in and around the 5 to 9 degree mark for parts of Labrador as well. Temperatures now just lost a degree or two. We're sitting around 5 degrees in Corner Brook right now. Same thing for Gander, and those temperatures are going to drop as we head through the overnight tonight. We do have an area of low pressure off to the east, and that is wrapping around some cooler air with it in behind it, and that means that everything that's falling right now as rain will change over to the potential for some snow as we head through the overnight tonight. Future tracker showing that quite clearly. As we head into after midnight, most areas along the northeast should be seeing some snow, and then up across Labrador as well. Happy Valley, Goose Bay, you'll see some rain tonight, and that will change over to the potential for some flurries as we head through the overnight tonight, and then some light snow activity expected for Lab West as well as we head into the afternoon. You can see that area of snow sticking around for pretty much in and around Gander and then Bonavista North, even areas towards Bonavista. And the northern Avalon could see some accumulation tomorrow afternoon as well. Otherwise, we should see some sun peek out across Labrador. You're going to see another round of snow move in into the afternoon on Tuesday and continue through most of Wednesday. So here's a look at the temperatures tomorrow. 2-3 degrees from areas central through to eastern. We are looking at some pretty gusty winds. Northwesterlies anywhere from 40 to 70. Exposed areas may see upwards of 80 kilometers per hour. And then areas along the west and the south, a beautiful afternoon, some sunshine. Temperatures a little cooler, but between 6 to 9 degrees. Your winds will be out of the northwest, 20 to 40 kilometers per hour. Staying above zero for central and Lab West, about 4 or 5 degrees. Again, with that transition through to or either mixed with rain or snow through the afternoon. And then flurries expected for coastal Labrador. Here's the snowfall amounts. This takes us through to Tuesday night. See, some areas could see, this is probably overdoing it, 10 centimeters. I'd say closer to, that'll be in the higher elevations if it does stay close to us at this point. But a good trace to 5 centimeters is certainly possible in some areas. May wake up to a trace as well for areas in the northern Avalon. It's not going to last long though, because take a look at the temperatures on Wednesday. Back up 8 to 10 degrees across the board with some sunshine, maybe a few cloudy periods in the mix, but overall those temperatures are going to warm up. A few showers possible on the west coast. Going to continue to see that snow across Labrador, at least some light snow for Lab West, 2 degrees, and then Nain and Cartwright as well. So anywhere on the coastal areas as well. Along the strait, you'll see some sunshine, 3 degrees, and then for the northern peninsula, about 6 degrees for St. Anthony on Wednesday. So certainly nice. By Thursday, we really jump up in those temperatures back into the teens. We haven't seen these temperatures in a while, 14 to 16 degrees. However, we will see that chance of some showers, but it does look like some sunshine will peek through as well at times. 10 degrees for Marystown. Port aux Basques sitting around the single digits. We'll probably see some fog patches along the south coast just because we're in that southerly flow. And then across Labrador, we're going to see the potential for some flurries stick around, certainly for Lab City up through northern portions of Labrador as well. With the temperature hovering around 4 degrees for Happy Valley, Goose Bay, we could see some showers in the mix as well. Wanted to share this photo, Second Falls at Leech Brook. Craig shared that one with me on the NL photos at cbc.ca earlier today. Just wanted to share that one with you. Thank you so much. And if you have any weather photos, send them to that email, nlphotos@cbc.ca.
And we want to share some more of Anthony's adventures in Natwashi.
These kids have really good aim, of course, especially if a teacher's involved as the target, as you're about to see. Lots of fun.
Yep, they're definitely targeting you.
Gets worse. There, right in the head.
Good shot.
I can't see. I can't see.
Look at all that snow.
Glasses. Good memories.
The House of Assembly is open this week. The government needs to make sure the bills get paid until the budget is introduced in June. We've also now had the speech from the throne setting out the direction for Andrew Furey's new majority government.
I invoke God's blessing upon you as you commence the work of the first session of the 50th General Assembly.
So, what do our political veterans think? Jerry Rogers is the former NDP leader, Colin Holloway, a former Liberal MHA, and Sandy Collins, a former PC cabinet minister. So, what should we read into that speech? Sandy, let's start with you. You've been part of a throne speech when you were a cabinet minister, so you've been on the sort of crafting side of this. What stood out when you heard that speech delivered last week?
Well, I guess first and foremost, speeches from the throne, they're a formality, they're obviously very traditional and how they unfold. But anyone who looks for any groundbreaking news or announcements certainly would be left wanting. They're generally, and this is not something to do with any particular party, because I think this is what we've seen over the last number of years, at least what I can remember. They're filled with a lot of buzzwords and, talking about revitalizing and bold decisions and new directions and those types of things. So I don't think it really said a whole lot. It kind of set a tone, I guess, with regards to the conciliatory collaboration tone, but that's not new either. So hopefully, I guess, words are cheap, actions are a little bit more difficult. So I guess with the House of Assembly opening and question period starting, we'll soon get to see if that tone carries over when it's most important. And let's see if the parties can actually work together for the betterment of the people.
Well, that kind of leads into one section of the speech that, Jerry, you kind of picked out and that you wanted to draw attention to. Let's have a little look here at one section from Judy Foote.
The recovery will require bigger, bolder steps. It will also require every member of this House of Assembly to put aside partisan issues and commit to work together. All honourable members must act today for the future of Newfoundland and Labrador. My government recognizes that the situation is critical, but the opportunity is great. Okay, so Jerry, why did you pick that clip in particular?
Well, I found it kind of an interesting clip. It sounds both like an invitation for everyone to work together, but it also sounds like government admonishing the opposition parties. And I believe really the biggest challenge that Premier Furey has ahead of him right now is trying to establish trust. His rhetoric is different than his action. And we've seen that with the calling of the election during the pandemic and then during the winter time. The unveiling now recently of the letter from the Chief Electoral Officer from Bruce Chalk to Andrew Furey, suggesting that if he were to hold the campaign, the election during a pandemic and during the winter, that he needed to do it much longer than 4 weeks. And so what we're seeing is that Furey hasn't been above board. He hasn't been totally open and transparent, which is what he's asking everyone to be. So we know that we need an all-party, he needs to use the all-party committee structures. He has to, if he really wants true collaboration. And that means, for instance, if we're looking at the election, modernizing the Election Act, it's not just modernizing. We have to look at issues like first past the post, proportional representation. It's not just about tweaking to make sure people can mail in a ballot. It's much more fundamental than that. But that cannot be in the hands of the Minister of Justice. There is no trust there right now. That Furey is going to have to work really hard to reestablish trust.
Colin, do you think that this sort of cooperation is possible? Are these kind of just words that you say in a throne speech because they sound good, or do you think there's a genuine interest there from the Liberals to cooperate, even though they have the majority of votes they need in the House to push through legislation, whether the opposition likes it or not?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a little hard to say. Like Jerry says, I mean, one of the best paths forward is to have an all-party committee. I think back to my time in the House of Assembly. So one of the pieces I was involved in was the Real Estate Trading Act, and there was a review, and it was an all-party committee. I found that very effective. You know, you could work out a lot of the, I guess, the potential bugs or disagreements between parties, bring in experts as well as bureaucrats. And then when it came back to the House, you were more likely to bring forward a piece of legislation that could be supported by all members, by all parties, and I think, you know, would also be supported by the stakeholders out into the community that would be the most impacted by it. You know, Jerry talks about, you know, the Elections Act, and that's in his throne speech as one of the pieces of legislation that's going to go forward. But also when I was there, and Jerry, you were there as well, we talked about democratic reform. And in democratic reform, so in 2019, it came forward as a private member's resolution. In 2020, there was an intent and a commitment by government that they would strike a all-party committee to look at democratic reform. So while you're going to talk about the Elections Act, and I've listened to all the issues around this past election, and I agree, Premier Furey has to have a focus there, but I think it needs to go bigger. And democratic reform needs to be a part of that process as well.
Sandy, it does take two to tango when it comes to cooperation. Do you think this is more possible with David Brazel as interim leader than it would have been if Ches Crosby had won his seat and was back in the House?
Yeah, I believe Brazel has set a tone. I saw an interview he had done with local media over the past number of days, set a tone, collaboration, talking about, you know, we're not going to be critical of government just to be critical of government. Again, now he has to put that in practice, but I think the tone is there, and I think his intention. Brazel's been around a long time. He's one of the more likable guys I've ever met, and he gets along well with others. I think he's able to park the politics. He sees a bigger picture, and hopefully his caucus follows that lead. As well with MHA Din, when he had spoken in the House the other day, I thought the tone was right. It didn't seem confrontational as some of the tones we've heard in the past. So hopefully everyone takes those feelings and brings them forward to when it matters. When question period happens, when legislation comes before the House, that's when it's important. And I sincerely hope to see that carry over.
Well, it was interesting. All three of you seem to manage to agree on a lot of this and get along, so hopefully the politicians take some notes, and we'll see what happens this week. Thanks, all three of you, for joining me and sharing your insights.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, Peter.
Well, the provincial government is paying close attention to this evening's federal budget. You can see the finance minister is set to speak, so let's listen in live right now.
Minister, I'll start if I can. Can I get your general reaction to what you saw in the federal budget?
Well, certainly it is a very progressive budget. I think it does address a lot of the concerns that Canadians have coming out of a very serious pandemic and now into the third wave in many places across the country. So I was pleased to see the investments continuing for business coming through the pandemic and coming out and talking about the transition coming out of COVID. And that was something that I've been speaking with. We have twice a month we get to speak with the Minister of Finance. It's been something that I've been saying, that we need to have this transition as you come out of the pandemic, and I think she recognized that in her budget. Very pleased to see the commitment to childcare, $30 billion over 5 years, looking to continue to lower the cost per child. I think this is very important to families, and in particular women, allowing them to get back into the workforce. I think it's a good economic program as well. I thought that was outstanding. We'll look at, as you know, last budget we lowered our cost per child care to $25 a day, and now with this assistance we'll be considering what more we can do. Also very pleased to see about $18 billion, just under $18 billion in commitment to green transition, and of course this province has an abundance of renewable energy opportunities, and looking now how we can utilize some of that funding. And again, commitment, I think, to some improvements to the EI program. You've seen some commitment to that as well. So I think, there are a lot of progressive things in this budget, and we're looking forward to working with the federal government as we move through this pandemic and then transitioning to a stronger economy. So I think there's lots here for the province of Newfoundland and Labrador as we move forward.
So in terms of the childcare, how will that integrate with the province's $25 childcare program? And does it require you to cost share and actually kick in more money into childcare?
Well, these are all things that we'll be looking at now as we analyze the announcements over the next 24 to 48 hours. Of course, we were already considering what further we could do for childcare. There's two real things here. Is the cost of childcare. We were able to lower it to $25. I was glad to see that she had committed to trying to get to $10, but also ensuring we have childcare spaces. So I don't know at this early juncture, I mean, as you know, she's just finishing up the speech, at this early juncture if there is any investment for that as well. So we'll be looking into those details over the next number of days, and we'll consider then what further we can do based on what the federal government is committed here. But again, continuing to lower the cost of childcare is important for our population growth. It's important for the economy and helping to have more women in the economy as well. So I think it's a good, prudent investment, and something that I know as a business leader I've been calling for quite some time.
That's Finance Minister Siobhan Cody live outside the House of Assembly reacting to today's federal budget. Let's bring in Peter Cowan. So what jumped out at you from what Siobhan Cody had to say there?
It is interesting because part of this child care plan is going to require provincial money. There's a lot of talk about this being cost shared, 50-50. So for a province that does not have a lot of extra money to work with right now and already has close to record deficits, we're going to have to see whether the province can come up with that money, whether or not there's any sort of leeway with the federal government that perhaps they can give us a little better deal considering the financial situation here. So as they drill down into this, they will have to take a closer look. One thing that we haven't really talked about is government is raising a few taxes in all of this. I don't think it'll affect very many people, but when we look at, there is going to be basically a luxury tax on boats over $250,000. That is for personal use, but in a province where some of those, fishing boats, people are going to be watching that closely to make sure that that doesn't get caught up in there. And other things like, for example, cars that are worth more than $100,000, private planes, probably not a big issue for a lot of people in this province. But those are a few on the revenue side of things that, we're going to keep an eye on as well, Carolyn.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Peter. Lots to comb through. I'm sure we'll have lots of stories in the coming days. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Well, let's get back to the COVID crisis on the mainland. The Ontario government is facing more criticism over its pandemic response. This morning, the provincial Liberals called on Premier Doug Ford to resign. Meanwhile, the NDP, the official opposition there, continues to push for paid sick leave, something that this expert agrees with.
Stop playing the melody of just restrictions and start to support and regulate properly. So this really means the first thing we need to do, if the provincial government wants to get this under control, they now need to support the essential workers, and they need to make sure that what is non-essential stops immediately. And if there are people who need to stay at home, that these people are paid properly.
And some grim milestones in Ontario today. There are more people in hospital with COVID-19 than ever before. There are also more people in intensive care and on ventilators than at any time during this pandemic. And all of those numbers are expected to rise. Well, staying with Ontario, nearly 4,500 new cases were reported there today and 19 deaths. The numbers have been like that with more than 4,000 new cases each day for 6 days now. One critical care physician spoke to the CBC's Andrew Nichols and described some of the dramatic challenges that hospitals there are now facing.
In broad statements, what it would mean is, let's say I had 2 patients that were in the emergency department who were critically ill, and I had only room to accommodate 1 more. I would be asking a group of independent clinicians to make an assessment on who is most likely to benefit from that ICU bed, based on their past medical history, how sick they are at that moment in time. And the person who is most likely to be alive and survive that critical care admission would be the one that gets the bed. And the other one would be offered the full medical care that we could give up to critical care. So it might mean oxygen, antibiotics, medication that would help. But if that patient's not doing well, and they're in pain and suffering, we would offer palliative care. And it would mean that there would be people who will die who otherwise would have survived or would have had a higher likelihood of surviving had they gone to critical care. And I can't, this is the second time I've described what a triage scenario would look like to sort of media. I spoke about this last night on a Twitter Spaces event. I can't believe I'm saying these words. I did not go into medical school and become a critical care physician to do this kind of work. And the moral distress that this is going to create for my colleagues and my profession as a whole is people will quit, people will leave, and this is going to be horrific and devastating for us all, but way more horrific for the patients and their families and their friends.
This is a war zone. What you described sounds like a war.
I really can't think of a better analogy. And the really tragic thing is that those in the line of fire are the people who are most vulnerable in our society. So right now, the people getting sick with COVID-19 are not the wealthy people who can work from home who are probably getting vaccinated. The people who are getting sick with COVID-19 are the people who have no choice but to leave their house and expose themselves to the virus at work. And they may or may not have been vaccinated, and they may or may not have the agency and the social capital while they go to work to speak up if they're in an unsafe environment. And when they do get sick, they're probably going home to a very crowded household with multi-generations living in the same building or household. And if they do get sick, the likelihood that they're going to infect everyone that they live with is very high. I took care of a patient this week in the hospital who had COVID-19 and was desperate to leave against medical advice while he was on 100% oxygen because his wife, his wife's mother, and his 6-year-old child all had COVID at home. And he was freaking out that his wife couldn't handle looking after everyone in his family. Entire families are getting sick with this. And it is affecting the most vulnerable in our society. It is infecting those with the least social capital to be able to speak up for themselves, those with the least amount of representation right now in cabinet and in government. And it's completely unmasked the inequities in our society. And I'm angry, and I'm sure you can see the anger in my voice. Yep. It is not the way I ever expected things to happen in this country. I'm going to leave it at that.
Welcome back. The Public Legal Information Association and the Sexual Assault and Prevention Center have teamed up to launch an awareness campaign about workplace sexual harassment called the Journey Project. The groups say sexual harassment can happen in any workplace, industry, or profession. Women are more likely to experience sexual harassment, while Indigenous women and members of the LGBTQ community are 3 times more likely. Kevin O'Shea is the co-manager of the project. He says there are options for dealing with sexual harassment outside of talking to police and starting a criminal investigation.
There's quite a lot that can happen, and that's the purpose of the Journey Project, is helping people to navigate through their options, through the possible routes forward, and to be supported as they do so, to make informed decisions, trauma-informed decisions.
I think that justice looks really different for different people. There are folks who go through different legal processes and feel, a level of vindication and a level of resolution, but I would say that there are probably a lot more who don't have that experience. So I think what's unique about Journey is that people get to define what resolution looks like and what justice looks like for them.
Well, a follow now to a story that we brought you last week. An air ambulance advocate in this province is calling for improvements to the system. You may recall in Labrador, a 73-year-old man waited more than 30 hours for a medevac. Eugene Nippard believes aircraft should be relocated to central Newfoundland, closer to people in rural and remote areas of the province. He would also like to see 2 private air ambulance contractors provide their own medical personnel to reduce response times. The Labrador man, who waited for more than a day for a medevac, is now on life support in St. John's.
Why do we need 2 air ambulances in St. John's with 70% of our population on the Avalon that don't need it? Why wouldn't they put it in Central? I mean, like Eva's here is there. They got an hangar in Central, in Gander. The government got an hangar in Gander. So why wouldn't they have them there? Plus, how much cheaper would it be for the province? I mean, if you own-base them, you wouldn't have to pay that $1,000 a day per diems. Plus, you got an eating hangar. You wouldn't have to be doing all the de-icing that you're doing. That's costing millions of dollars. So, I mean, all these things can change, but the government is just not listening.
Well, that's almost it for the show tonight. Anthony, how does it feel to be back on air after 4 months being in that Twishish?
Well, the first thing I got to work, of course, that thing you do is, what's my password for this again?
Right.
So I had to try to get everything going again, so there's that. But no, it's great to be back. It was a great 3.5 months, but it's always nice to come home. You know, it's weird, Ashley will appreciate this. I actually miss the snow. In March in Labrador, being able to ski in a t-shirt, with long pants and a t-shirt in the blazing sun, it's a fantastic treat. So lots of stuff and lots of people that I'm going to miss, but it's always great to get home. Good to see you guys too, I should have said.
Yeah, it's great to see you. It's so nice to have you back.
Very nice.
I definitely don't miss the snow. Well, that's it for us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Have a great evening.